guys, welcome to the Wedding Pros Podcast. We're going to be doing something different today. We're going to be doing a film review. Huxley Film is our high-end wedding cinema brand, and we've been doing some really interesting stuff. And we recently just released a film from a New Year's Eve wedding in Boston that, I think we're really happy with how it came out, but also it was just a really unique challenge, and it was something totally new for us. And so we figured, why not break it down and talk about what goes into making a wedding like this. So let's check it out. Let's dig in right now to the behind the scenes of Kara and John.
Celebrate family itself, and let's do it by having a big frickin' party. Big frickin' party that they can hear all the way up in heaven.
It's very striking for both of them that they have pursued their dreams and they continue to pursue. But in living those dreams, they came to learn that two is better than one. It is important that we follow our dreams, but it is nothing compared to the great, great wisdom of God, that we do not have to be alone. So this is why Jesus said that this is what heaven is going to be like. This is why we should enjoy this day as deeply and as fully as we can. And at the same time, we should remember that it is nothing compared to what John and Kara will now experience. Something more deep, more lasting, more joyous than having your dreams fulfilled.
Hey, it's me if you got a minute. It's nothing urgent. I'm going to be on a conference call from 1 till probably 2, and then on the road coming down to see you. But I would like to address one thing that's on my mind relative to the conversation we had this morning. I want to make it clear to you, I will never, ever again in my life be disappointed in you in any way, shape, or form because of who you are. The only time I'm ever going to be disappointed is if you're not living your dream within your means and your abilities. And that is something you've always done your entire life. So to think otherwise is crazy. And I want to just share with you a little bit more of that when you have an opportunity. So I'll talk to you later.
The last time I was with all of you was to eulogize my father. And so it's fitting that this time we're here to talk about another man whose life is now over. John Francis Andreoli.
What is up, guys? How you guys doing today?
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, so we're here.
What's up, dude?
We're here with Rich Ferri, Jared Haskell, and of course myself, Jason McCutcheon, and we're going to be talking about this film. So Jared, like, do you remember? Because I feel like it was so long ago when we started talking about Huxley Film. Like, I remember the name was like a big deal to us. We were just picking a name for months. But why did we decide to do this?
Yeah, so Huxley Film, I think, we both have been doing, wedding films for about 10 years and have put together this brand, and it's just kind of like rolling. But probably like a lot of people watching or listening, you kind of get into this groove of just like, I need to crank these weddings out. Like I have 30 weddings that I just have to do, and they're just going to be at some country club down the street, and they just want to see, X, Y, and Z. And so you're developing this product for, a person that, wants to see friends, wants to see family. Art is, important to them, but probably not the most important thing to them, I guess. And so we were like, we have a really awesome product for this type of person. But me and you kind of being like film nerds ourselves, were like, how can we make something that a certain person that really values art and really values cinema as probably one of their highest priorities on their wedding day, something that they could love too, and something that we could as artists be proud of. Because when you run a business, it's always kind of going to be like, what can I do to make this business run really well, but also what can I do that satisfies my artistic integrity and makes me happy and pushes the boundaries of art. And so since we've been doing this for such a long time, I think things can just become a little bit easy. And we really wanted something that challenged us. And we were like, how can we do this? And I think you and I were both like, how can we get back to the roots of being filmmakers, like when we first started Stock with Love, we pretty much started to buy gear. And so I always felt like we started it, even Huxley, to be like, how can I afford to buy awesome cinema lenses? And so going back to the roots of like becoming filmmakers and learning and becoming the student again, I think that's kind of where it started. And I think that someone like Rich was always super inspiring to you and I, because we were like, dude just puts together the coolest films and has the coolest ideas and is like so passionate. Probably don't know how I could sell Rich's films to my clients, but he sells them to his clients. How can we find those kind of clients, and what kind of product can we put together for a kind of higher end luxury kind of client that would be would be interesting? And so I think that's the origin.
Well, isn't
right?
it interesting, guys? Like the intersection between equipment and inspiration, and like you. Mm-hmm. It's funny because it's like I am totally behind. Like, it's not the gear. It's not the gear. It's not the gear. I get that. Like, it isn't like you could buy. I actually think the equipment that we shot this wedding on, if you didn't know what you were doing, it would be terrible. It would be so hard. Right. So it's like you can't just have gear and make great films. It's not what it's about. But I do think it's like interesting. It's like, imagine if you were a painter and you were painting and you only had red and green, and that's all you ever heard of. And then somebody was like, oh, I have a new thing for you. It's called blue. And and like a couple years later, they're like, I have a new thing for you. It's called yellow. You know? And I feel like it's like, that is, if you're like a serious lover of creating this type of thing, I think that is where it really kind of falls, right? It's like, what can I find to inspire me? You know, and some of it is equipment, and of course some of it's like other people's art.
I'd be interested to hear what Rich kind of has to say about it, but like we talked about it on the podcast a couple weeks ago, where we're talking through like what is creativity, and I think the main conclusion that we kind of came to was creativity in a lot of cases is really just problem solving, right? To be creative, you're solving a certain kind of problem. Like back in the 70s, 80s, when making a film was like really difficult, and even before that, even more difficult. But they didn't have the budgets that they do today. It was just like, how can I make my film the way I want it under this certain budget? You have to be super creative to do that. So they came up with all these like processes to still create the thing that they wanted to. And some of it at the time might have been like super zany, but you're like, oh, that like really works. And so I think gear in and of itself is like a problem to be solved because it's so complex. And I know Rich kind of loves his gear. Rich, what do you kind of take away from that?
I do love my toys. Oh yeah. It's funny. I feel so strongly about the idea of I love the metaphor of like red and green being your only colors, and then somebody gives you another thing. Like the simplest example for people to think about is the invention of like drone photography. It's not the idea that like, oh, finally I have a drone to pull off my blank shot. There was no such shot. It's a brand new color. It's the color blue. And before you had a drone, you that wasn't something you were wondering, and you were not problem solving. Like the actual invention of the gear at an accessible level changes the entire way we think about shooting and the way we think about like exposition, introduction, all that kind of stuff. And for me, like I remember when I first started and I was shooting on my T3i with my kit lens, and there was this like unreachable goal, and that goal I later discovered was like depth of field. And I was shooting at like a 24 millimeter on a crop sensor camera at f3.5. And I was just like, I can't make my images look the way that everything I look at looks like. And that was so frustrating. And there was no amount of like studying and practice and discipline that would have gotten me to a low aperture prime lens. And that for me is like the big piece. I think, and Jay, I think that's what you're saying, which is like when you unlock certain pieces of equipment, it's not just saying like, oh, now that I'm shooting in 6K RAW, I'm going to be great. I would actually argue that the cameras that we shot on and the lenses that we shot on are not going to elevate on their own the film at all. at all. They're not like a drone or a gimbal or a low aperture lens compared to your otherwise high aperture lenses. Like, it's not an actual piece of technology that closes an achievement gap. It's purely like style and like sparkle.
It's vibe.
And like, it's like it's the vibe. And to harness that is really good and important and can be transformative, but there needs to be a word. I can't really think of like the best way to describe it, but there needs to be like two categories of like innovation by way of gear. And, you know, there's the gear that without it, you absolutely can't make this. And then there's the gear that without it, you can't make it sparkle or shine in that way. But it's not the same, you know, like low aperture on the nifty 50 Canon 1.8 will look like low aperture on the Cine Prime at 1.8. So like, it's not that. So it's like the thing about the Cine Prime that makes it special is like harder to articulate. So there has to be like two ways of thinking. And as we start talking about gear, we'll want to like think about which one does it fall into.
Yeah. So let's just, if you're not aware, basically what we did is we shot this wedding on all Blackmagic cameras. They released a line of really wonderful cameras a year ago or so. Blackmagic Pocket Cinema cameras. We have a 4K. We have two 6Ks. And we also shot this wedding on a Ursa Mini, which I know is a little overkill, but man, it looks great. And but we didn't use it as much as I thought we would have, by the way. But anyway, we also used basically only Canon Cinema Primes. We did use a 7200 at one point, and we did use a 16-35 L. Those are L lenses a little bit for the drone stuff. But I mean, not drone. We didn't even use a drone, so no drone. But this was no in-camera stabilization. This is no in-lens stabilization. This is no autofocus. And this was literally, and so this is what I love. And every time I break down why do I love making things, it always comes down to producing struggle and striving in your art and forcing you to be challenged and interested, because I get bored really fast with anything. It's like once I feel like I'm like, and this is probably premature, like I'm probably not an expert at hardly anything, but you're just like, I'm bored with this. And like, I know a lot of people, like, it's great. AF, IBIS, all those things are awesome. We use them. They're great tools. And it will produce a type of work. And one could call that work lazy if you wanted. For some people, it could. For other people, it's just efficient and reliable, however you want to put it. I think there is a way that the easier things get, the harder it gets to focus on what you're doing. Because why would you? Why am I going to focus on nailing this shot? Why am I going to focus on the composition? I don't have to. You can fix it in post. You can do a lot of stuff. And so we removed a lot of our capabilities to make this because we wanted it to be, I don't want to be pretentious and say like we wanted it to be pure, but we wanted it to be hard and challenging, and we wanted a degree of difficulty because, in my opinion, that is what makes something artful. Was it hard to do by the people who made it? Like, was it hard? And did it require high skill?
I'll make sure to remind you how much you love struggle the next time you're working in DaVinci Resolve and want to throw the computer out the window.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good point, and I think that's one reason why we wanted to bring Rich on to kind of help with Huxley and just kind of be like, hey, how can we make this really great art? Because to me, Rich is like the ultimate non-compromiser. Like when it comes to producing great cinema is like, I remember we sat down a while ago and we talked about it last time you were on the podcast, Rich, when, talking about focus rolling. And I think that stood out to both Jay and I because we were like, Rich is really passionate about
focus.
Nailing focus. Like, well, we were like, you need to be. Yeah, but like Rich is really passionate about it. He was like, if I can't get a guy, a 6-second shooter who like can nail it, it's like I just have to have that. And I'm like,
that focus pump.
I would probably just cut away to another angle or whatever. And but we were like, we need, and again, to go back to that challenge, like the reason why one of the many reasons, by the way, I love Rich is just he's not going to compromise with that kind of stuff. And just like, that's the challenge for me as a filmmaker, is just like, how can I find these challenges? And Rich is like, when I look at Rich, I'm like, I need to do things more like the way he does things and become obsessive about the gear and nailing my focus more and making sure my guys are nailing focus more. And just, so that's one reason why we're like, oh, well, when we do something awesome, we have to have Rich on board. We need that kind of person on our team to like, crush this kind of wedding. So yeah. What was enticing for you, Rich? What kind of, what did you think when Jay and I, first threw you the idea and kind of pitched it your way? What were your initial thoughts?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying that, like the idea of like that no compromises being an attribute and not like an annoying trait. So I appreciate that you are of the small cohort of people who find that to be endearing and not super annoying. But the other thing that I really took away from the whole experience, and when you guys pitched it to me, was actually sounds exactly like what you were saying, Jay. Like we're going to put ourselves in a place of discomfort. That was really enticing to me. I've been shooting both in the cinema space as a DP and in the wedding space for a while at this point, but weddings in particular are a muscle that is starting to get some like grooves and some ruts, and like I really relate to the idea that like I have learned how to use a low aperture lens on a gimbal in golden hour to produce something very attractive of a couple. These are like, they're tried and true methods that work. And I'm sure that maybe I do it differently than other people and everyone has their own flair, but there's like, there's a restriction inside of the idea that like, when I have this tool that can track a face and can sit on a gimbal and can do this kind of stuff, then you start to operate inside of you may ask yourself questions, and you may ask yourself like, am I pushing the boundary? How can I do it better? But it's done within like a nice tidy box. And
yeah,
this particular proposal that you guys gave was so enticing because it was the idea that said, hey, go do a wedding. And it was also our first time shooting together.
Oh yeah.
And you're like, go do a wedding. So I want to do a good job and make a good impression. And it's like, great, take away all your tools. So there were some really interesting challenges, which is like, we're using Canon Cine Primes, which have a very unusually long focus throw. So I'm not able to rack the way that I'm used to racking, and that was a little bit insecure. And we decided that we were going to put them on these shoulder rigs that had a wireless remote focus roller. And so there's like, again, an extension of my body that like pushed me further from like my comfort zone. And then we're going to use cameras I've never used before. The 6K had just come out. We used the Ursa Mini Pro G2, and like that also I hadn't touched yet. And we're going to use monitors that we're not familiar with, and we're going to record. We're not going to record like ProRes. We're going to record RAW to external SSDs, and we're going to use a rig that is built based on like a rig that you guys found through Henry Martin's and others through like the conferences that you had gone through. And the combination of all those variables was like pretty terrifying. And I thought, like, without internal image stabilization, without autofocus, without gimbals, and with all new tools, that's a really terrifying thing to look at my friends and in that day my employer and be like, I'm going to do a good job. Because it's like, I'm not sure that I'm going to do a good job. Like, I have a lot of experience doing a good job, but not in this environment. And that for me was, I felt like New Year's Eve was the first wedding I ever shot again. It felt like a brand new thing, and it had all of those like first day of school jitters, and it also had the first day of school jitters that this could be the best thing ever.
Yes, I think I felt the same way. So this wedding, as you just referred to, was a New Year's Eve wedding. A good friend of ours, a person I actually shot her wedding, a planner named Kristen Gregorian, kind of presented us a wedding earlier in the year. And she was like, oh, I got this wedding. It's really, really nice. And we had said, oh, we're doing this new thing. And because we've been telling all these planners, all our planner friends like that would hear it, hey, we got this new thing we want to do. Pretty much no one took us on the offer. And one person, I kind of got them to let us try it. And then this was the first where she was like, oh yeah, I want this. So she presented it to one couple. The couple said, nah, we don't want it. And then she presented it to Kara and John, and they were like, absolutely, yeah, let's work with them. I'm not really sure they really had any idea what they were getting into in terms of what our intentions were. It wasn't like they'd seen work we had done and said, that's what I want, all those things. But Kara is an actress. John...
It's a lot easier to sell people when you can show them what you actually want to do.
Yes.
It was like, here's our idea, and here's what you're going to spend, maybe not a ton of money. It's not going to be like Ray Roman money, but you're still going to spend a lot of money, essentially more than what we would charge on our regular, kind of stop-go-love package.
We pretty much got the wedding
and here's the idea.
Exclusively based on Kristen's recommendation.
Yep.
And the pitch was like, please let us do this. We're good. Trust us.
We're going to do something cool. Trust us. I know you don't know us, but trust us.
And so the situation was like, oh, we're going to go down to New York because she was working out of New York and he was working out of Seattle. And we're going to do all this great pre-production. We're going to spend all this time with this couple, and it's going to be so intimate and private and personal. And we tell this great story. Nope. Totally got watched out the window. And unfortunately, Kristen's father passed away. So all our ideas of not Kristen's. Kara's father, the bride, passed away. And all our ideas of pre-production and all this went out the window. And it was like, I don't remember feeling any certain way about it, except I was sad for Kara. But in terms of the product, it was like, well, okay, we're trying this new thing, and it's not going as we had thought. We're not going to have the assets that we thought. And so I think the challenge quickly became, and I loved how this ended up working out, was how do we take, now this was high end and very nice. So I don't want to say it's a regular wedding. Like, this was a awesome wedding, beautiful, lot of people in a luxurious, beautiful location. It was top of the line from wire to wire. But in terms of a schedule, time with the bride, storytelling elements, I would say, you're dealing with basically a normal wedding. It didn't materialize into the type of high touch, high concept storytelling assets that we thought we were going to have. And in hindsight, and I remember even at the time, I remember thinking, like, this brand will not work if we can't take weddings like this and absolutely kill it. We can't. I'm happy that it went the way we did, because I don't really want to have 3 days with a couple to create something beautiful. And so it ended up being just one day with the couple. We did shoot a little bit within the day before just to see what we could see, but at the rehearsal dinner, but nothing special, no portrait session. Everything never worked out. We ended up just basically doing like a normal wedding, right?
Yeah. I would even say we had less portrait session time with the couple than probably 90, 95. I'm not sure about what you thought, Rich, but I felt like we really didn't have a lot of one-on-one time with the couple that I normally would have on a wedding day.
That's another piece that added to the terror, which is that not only were we gonna do this wedding, which with all the variables that I already explained are new, but there's also some, aside from my in-body image stabilization and autofocus and gimbal being taken from me, I also knew that we were going to be doing portrait sessions in the dark inside a hotel.
We had no light. We had no natural light session.
So like some of the ways that you can make sure that like how you can make yourself a hero, like all those things were removed, and the things that help elevate reality, like they were all being removed. And my fear was like, how do we get this wedding not to feel like ultra real in a boring way and an unexciting way? And then there was another disadvantage, from a typical wedding. In a typical wedding, there's like an immense amount of like dialogue on the front end where there's a rapport, and on the day of the wedding, there is a sense of like, this is my friend, and we can do things. And if I decide that I see something exceptional, and I think we talked about it in the last podcast, where like sometimes you'll say, "Hey, couple, I know that we didn't anticipate doing a sunset session, but the sun is awesome, and we have rapport. Like, would you give me 5 additional minutes so that we can go do that thing?" And all of those pieces were missing. Like when I walked into the hotel that morning, the coordinator introduced herself and walked me down the hallway, and I was like, "Which one is the bride?" Mm-hmm. And that's a weird feeling, and that's just like another example of like the lack of the ways in which this wedding was not like to our advantage in terms of it being like you had said it was a very typical wedding. If you were a hired shooter, part of a wedding company to go shoot and try to do your best, it was very typical in that way. Like it was not a what you think of when you see some like really wild high-end weddings that leave you saying like, how did they build the rapport with the couple, or build in the timeline to do that, or have access to something that allowed them to make this thing that I'm
how did they get them to act like that or do that?
Yeah, it did not have that. It was just a very typical wedding in that way.
Yep. And so let's talk a little bit about our pre-production process. By the way, you can check out the film. We're going to link it. You can check it out on YouTube. And I encourage you, check it out. Maybe it would make this conversation make more sense to you. But so this film ended up becoming, I think, a really nice film, really dynamic. I was telling Rich the other day, I was like, in my head, this film had really 3 to 4 pivot points ahead of time. I was like, I want it to have a really poppin' intro that's just like amazing, and so I don't have to edit a separate teaser. But also just have that like right when they watch it and everyone watches it, they're immediately drawn in. And then I was like, I want the portrait, or I want the getting ready footage to be elegant. I don't want anything where the bride's not in her makeup. I don't want anything that feels less than organized and put together. And I want it to almost feel like a product shoot, like high-end, luxurious, that puts them in their best light in every shot. I want the bride and groom to look like that. And then I was like, I want there to be some kind of sequence that's outside of time, that we can use in a creative way. Because to me, that's the the high-end production. This is why we're good filmmakers, because we have something that looks, well, how did they do that? You know, even, and not that it's hard, but you know, what did they use? Was that in post-production? Did they use real lights? How did they get that image? So we have this quasar section. And then of course you have the party section at the end. And I think what's important to me about creating these films, this is not a knock on anyone else's films at all, because I think everyone has their own flavor, but we didn't want to be the types of films that are high end and high concept, but low. They're not sincere, and like they don't feel like they belong to a family. They feel like they belong to everyone. And so we were like, we don't want it to be like that. We called it Heirloom Films, like Huxley Films, and our little tagline, we call it Heirloom Films. We want it to be an heirloom. We want it to be passed down. And so that really played into a lot of stuff. So we wanted a personal element too. And so when we were talking about this, like ahead of time, we were talking about, okay, well, how do we want it to look? We didn't even know how we wanted it to look, right?
Yeah, there was the conversation about look was really interesting. I thought when we really started those early conversations in the early days, I think we all sort of knew that all of our tools were going to be removed from us that we normally have, especially once Kara's dad passed away, and we realized that even the lines of communications were going to stop. Mm-hmm. And so we thought, boy, we haven't been able to do any advocating on our behalf to get locations or for portraits and that kind of stuff. So it's like we have to actually use equipment and pre-planning to do the things that you said. Like I want to create an environment that feels devoid of time and chronology, so that we can use it whenever in the edit. And you're like, I also want it to feel disorienting, and so you had floated the idea that we would use colored LEDs and like that kind of stuff. But it was interesting. That was like what we had in our toolkit to bring in. We said, what we need to do in order to come to this wedding is whoever this couple that stands before us is when we meet them, we have to have some tools, and we also have to have a crew that's ready to essentially be like, we were getting this. What ended up happening, we were saying that room down the hall is available to you at night. Go in there, stare at it, but without your couple. And did you bring any tools with you? And we thought, yes, we brought some interesting lights. We brought some more conservative and safe but very beautiful lights, and we brought a crew to do it. And we went in and we were like, our choices have to be done without the couple, but also make something that would feel like an heirloom, like that it feels not so stylized, not so gimmicky, that it won't feel like a personal heirloom for the family, but also will allow us to elevate without the couple actually in the room and making choices. So the pre-production process for us was a lot about developing, like we don't know Huxley's brand yet, so we don't have like a LUT. It's not like a color or like a post-production style that's going to say, hey, here's the through line. And we don't really have the couple story really well entrenched. So like, well, let's think about like a shooting style or a camera movement style or lights. And specifically, we brought these colored RGB quasar tubes and Practa lights inside of soft domes to sort of say like, well, here are our toolkits, so that if everything is ultra average of the day, if we can't find something that's that's something that's like not naturally elevated in some way, that we can elevate any room.
Well, it was like real production.
Thank goodness, because
like we were like,
was that?
We're gonna document, and we're gonna have this almost like a documentary style of filmmaking, but hopefully elevated. And I do think the cine lenses like pull it a little out of documentary, even like the way that they even just the way the gradation of the focus sweep. It's not like, because like if you're not familiar with the difference between cinema and photo lenses are all about precision, because you're going to be shooting 1.2, right? And you want it to be tack sharp in that one spot. And they don't really care how it really gradiates, like when you're rolling focus. They don't care if it just looks like a plate moving forward and backwards on your image. But cine lenses don't do that. Cine lenses have a softness to them. They have a little bit of a bloom sometimes, because they want to be they tend to be more forgiving on the focus roller and produce just an image. Somebody asked me when they saw the film, they're like, did you have Pro Mist on that? And I was like, nope, it's just how the lenses look. And I was telling even Jared, and I'm like, this is the quality of this lens. It has its own story to tell. And I think as we were making this and planning it, we knew that there was going to be a level to making this that we weren't going to know until it was done, right? So we knew we had to bring something to the table that we knew would elevate it. The RGB lights was one of the things that we planned, and I was like, we're going to use it somewhere. And we also planned that I wasn't going to really be shooting much, and that especially during certain times, that I was going to be more of like a producer and trying to make sure everything was ready to go. And we had you guys, Dominique was there, and myself, and we had all planned out. It was very organized in terms of and I was really happy with how it turned out, and I think everyone killed it in that area. And then we also had this other idea in doing this photo booth, because we were like, how do we want to include family in this film? And I knew I didn't want what we do with Stop Go Love, and this is not bad, and I'm sure you do this with Rangeley as well, is we pretty much go, all right, go get some pictures of people's families during the portrait session. Go get some pictures of people's families during the pre-ceremony. That's what we do. I don't know if that's what you do.
Or you shoot over the shoulder of the photographer doing group sessions. And make sure that if they don't appear in a flattering way, someone else in the video, well, at least I have people arm in arm, holding mom.
And we were like,
it's a bit of an afterthought.
It feels so wrong not getting those moments. Like I remember on this day, Rich, I looked at you and I was like, do you always get this stuff? Because I hate this stuff. I hate shooting this stuff all the time. And I look at your films and I'm like, I don't know if he shoots that. And I look at someone like Henry's weddings and I'm like, I don't know if he shoots the family portrait sessions all the time. It's like, I guess you feel like you kind of have to.
For Stop Go Love,
that traditional.
We shoot it because we're producing a product that like it needs to be the same every time. So the editor needs to know what they're going to get so they can just have it and make it. Right. With this, we were like, we don't like that. We don't want to see that. Yeah. Like, I don't ever want to put it in the film. Right. And so we were like, but they need their family. Right. That.
Yep.
So we.
Yeah. Jay, if I could go back to just kind of choosing our spots creatively, like up front, I think we both saw, we all saw the wedding day. You and I had met with Kara and John like a month before the actual wedding. That's the first time that we sat down with them. We went to some restaurant in the middle of nowhere, Massachusetts, and sat down and just kind of got to know them as much as we
my
could.
My tire went flat. I remember that.
Oh yeah, and it was snowing. Yeah. But we even still, we looked at each other and we're like, there's not like a real story thing that's like, oh, we met here and then, we were going back and forth between New York and Seattle. I have an acting career, he does this other, it wasn't that kind of story, but the things that we knew were about the wedding day itself. And so we're like, okay, what's the wedding day look like? It's New Year's Eve. So there's kind of like this element of like cool party that we can play around with. There's the countdown element that we'll see in the actual film that, so there's some ideas in it just being like a New Year's Eve wedding. How can we make this really cool? And I think we had both shot New Year's Eve weddings. And I saw some of like the challenges of a New Year's Eve wedding from just shooting in the past was always lighting. Usually the day is just like, honestly, the weirdest type of wedding day where it's like, usually you shoot the ceremony and by the time you get out of the ceremony, it's like dark.
It's so like dark by like 4:30 or something, session. Right?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So we were like, okay, we're not going to have these sessions. And then also knowing that we hate doing the family sessions, we were like, okay, these are the problems. Again, it's creativity. I think, and the more that I do and challenge myself creatively, the more I realize any creativity that comes out of us is oftentimes just like, this was a huge challenge to us. This was a problem, and we had to find a way
you
to
just
solve
accept
it.
the variable that you can't change too, right? You just go, you don't try to, and this is what a lot of people do is they go, oh, well, my films, I have golden hour. And so I'm not shooting any films that don't have golden hour. Whether it be they go in...
And sometimes you kind of have to have that fight. You have to just be like, can you change your ceremony time so we can have golden hour light instead of having golden hour light?
Well, and
ceremony?
I support people...
But in our case, we were like, well...
I was going to say, I support people doing that.
We're coming on late. We can't really have that much... Yeah, we can't really have that much of a say like we normally would, like 6 months beforehand, because we just didn't have that conversation 6 months beforehand. So we were like, well, if we're not going to have light... also, I've worked with this photographer before. I know the way that he likes to work. Can we give him kind of his own space to work, and then we can ask kind of for our own space?
And that was one of the key things.
What can we do about timing? Yeah, we talked to the planner, and we were like, what do you think about us having our own time, our own lighting setup? Because then you're just not relying on the photographer's kind of setup, which is typically what I would do on a Stop Go Love film, is just say like, well, this is what we're given. We'll just, do whatever we can with what's given to us and try our best. Asking for the specific time and the specific kind of space, I think was huge. And then also the photo booth too. That was solving a big problem for us because we were like, family photo session is going to be inside of a church with crummy, like super tungsten-y light. It's not going to look good. Like, I don't want to include that in this type of film. I want it to look awesome. What can we do that incorporates the family but maybe isn't like, I don't know, just them all looking
typical
at the camera, like posing, looking at the photographer? Like, that's just super lame. So we were like, let's make this cool photo booth idea that we can incorporate family. And
we literally
awesome.
used it.
I loved it.
Yeah, it looked awesome, and we literally used that photo booth for probably less than 5 seconds. But I like the impact it has was big, because first of all, we had no idea what anyone was going to say at the wedding. Luckily, it was a wealth of content. Many great orators were at this wedding, and And the guy gave a speech about family. And I was like, perfect. I can freaking nail this because it's going to tell the story. And so a lot of it was, I think let's just break down a couple of things really quick. Our pre-production was, where can we impose our creative will and where must we sacrifice our will and ignore it, give it away. We're not going to think about it. It's not going to be part of the thing we stress over. And so we pretty much gave up the portrait session. We were like, I remember saying, Rich, just go with him a little bit. We used one shot from it, shoot a little bit. Let's see if we can get out of it, but we said, I'm going to make sure. And I remember you guys were like hesitant as whether I'd be able to get it. And I was like, oh, I'm going to get this. And I was like, I need at least 15 minutes with the couple by themselves. And I was like, we have to have it. That's going to be the moment that we can stylize it and do something high-end and unique and special. And we need it. I also was like, hey, we're going to give away this idea of shooting documentary-style family shots, which we really didn't include much of them, and we didn't shoot much of them. For a lot of reasons, by the way. We don't even have the light latitude on those cameras to shoot in those dark locations. We used a couple of shots, but it's not like we can walk in there, crank our ISO to 5,000, have a no-noise image, and just rock it. We can't really do that. And so I was like, so then we gave that away, but we took, and we said, what I need, and this was a producer thing for me, is running around, grabbing family during that cocktail hour. Come over here. We're doing this thing for Karen and John. They're going to love it. Come on. Rich standing there. Let's making people laugh and smile. Do a crazy thing. Making this little photo booth. And they're little things, right? That was 20 minutes of the day, I think. More setup, but of actual shooting and content collection. And it almost all of it made the film. And it actually made a huge difference.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the role of not just pre-production, but the role of a producer. Like, to think about weddings from a cinematography and production world context is huge, because one of the things that you learn about production for commercial work and stuff is that the day of the shoot is expensive. You have every crew member is on. Everyone needs to be fed. All the rentals are on the clock right now. So shoot days are expensive, and their time expensive and their money expensive. And weddings are similar, but I don't think we think of them in that way. And that the way that you combat the expense of shoot days on film production is that you actually maybe hit the camera record 3 times. And then you wrap that location and you move on. And an event videographer like this is preposterous. The idea that you capture in high volume and you make your art later on the editing bay. And the absolutely crazy difference about this wedding was that, Jay, you could easily be lead shooting and as a completely great and competent cinematographer, but instead you played primarily the role of saying, hey, I'm going to advocate for my people on the front end, days prior to the wedding and on the day of the wedding. And as a result, we were able to do the style of wedding videography that I do on my own, I think a lot of people would relate to, and it's of that former style. And so the fact that on the day of the wedding, we built a photo booth, which had a ring of backlights and a key light and an eye light around a camera. The floor was taped with gaff tape, and we had a line of people getting ready to go to the photo booth. That was one look. We had a Quasar RGB room, which had multiple Quasars. We had removed all the furniture, and we were set up with 3 cameras ready to shoot it, meaning none of us were out shooting other things. We were all waiting for you to bring them in. And we set up a third room, which we didn't even end up using. We created this huge ballroom space on the off chance that the couple would bite and would want to come dance in this ballroom that we lit with huge rings of light that we didn't even use. And the idea that on the front
I literally
end,
forgot about that.
I didn't, because part of me carries the image that never was. There's an image of them dancing that is in my mind. We thought about it a lot, and it's not there. And anyway, but I think that there's value to pre-production that I can't be it can't be ignored from the conversation. The very fact that I could like confidently stand in a room for 20, 30, 40 minutes, tinker with light with a stand-in and mess around with levels and try shots where a couple is not even with me, but I'm later going to ask them. That is impossible on a wedding without this level of pre-production and without a day of producer who's doing the advocating for you. The fact that you could like, normally when you're at a wedding, you always have one ear listening for cheers and noise to know like I'm missing something, and I shouldn't be chasing this really beautiful detail shot. I'm wasting time and I'm going to miss something critical. To be given permission to say like, you're not wasting time. In fact, this is what we agreed on, and every sort of stakeholder knows that the video team is going to be tucked in that room for 30 minutes working on something so that your portrait session is 5 minutes. Like that level of confidence that we could turn our ears off and really focus on producing a space with cool light. That was the most unfamiliar experience in weddings. It's so familiar in commercial space and production space, but so unfamiliar in weddings. And, it's crazy to say, normally when you shoot high volume, you can cover a wedding video of any length. You can cover it confidently because you have a volume of footage. And so even if the footage isn't spectacular, you can do high volume, high cuts, and you can make it work. The other side of it is just as true, which is like heavily thought about, planned for, well lit, well controlled, and well coached scenes like a portrait session. Even though we only shot for 5 minutes, like you said, you got 5 usable minutes, and not only 5 usable minutes, but 5 usable minutes that were aligned with what the pre-planned edit was going to be. So that's a lot of good footage. When you're culling, you're using most of those clips. That's crazy. And I think that was, for me, the biggest difference about that wedding. It wasn't the fact that every piece of gear and the relationship and the venue and the time of day were different. Those were bewildering, but the idea of like an on-site producer who also pre-produced and was also doing my bidding on the day of and also was leaving those lights and those stands in the room for me when I arrived, totally unfamiliar. And it's going to hurt to go back to shooting weddings without it, because it changed the entire experience, and I think in the positive.
Yeah, I mean, I think we wanted everybody to be unleashed.
Weddings are all about like, I think the majority of weddings are really just you're totally out of control, right? Like the whole thing is just going, and I oftentimes just feel like I'm just riding the coattails of this moving machine that's always going, and I'm just kind of like peeking in. Maybe I'm asking people for like shots here and there, but it's like I'm just kind of like along for the ride, and whatever I get, and I don't have that kind of control because I don't have that producer role advocating for us. But in this case, it was like we need to get these shots, and so I think Jay was like a huge help. I don't think we would have been able to do probably a majority of what we did without somebody advocating. I mean, Jay went outside. They had this huge New Year's Eve party for you listening at home. And outside, all these lights shining.
It's a
on the
concert.
Hotel,
it's not just a party, Jared. It's literally like a stage with like nationally known bands.
Yeah, they were making snowflakes, the lights on the hotel that we were at, because there was just this huge concert party New Year's Eve thing going on outside. It's right downtown Boston, New Year's Eve. And so Jay went outside, and I'm like shooting, and I'm like, oh, this is the worst. The groom is near the window tidying up his tie, and these blue lights are just like hitting his face. I'm like,
when we go through the film, I'll show you some. We left a little of the cast in there, just I couldn't remember.
Yeah, because it was pretty intense. But I'm like, here we are. We did all this pre-production. I've been talking about this one shot I'm gonna get of John, where I'm gonna push into him, and I'm going to have him look up as he's doing his bow tie at me. In my head, I had this shot for like half a year in my brain. And then here we go, and the blue lights are hitting it. I'm like, ugh. But then Jay comes to the rescue and is like, hey, guys, goes outside, talks to the lighting people outside, and is like, any chance we could get these lights turned off for just a few minutes? They're like, yeah, no big deal. Turn them off.
The guy actually said to me,
shots. Yeah.
He was like, oh, yeah, I used to work in weddings. I understand.
Yeah. But that's the day. Like, I would never in a million years get that if it wasn't for,
I think that's important to note.
It was
like,
awesome.
I was with the coordinator with the bride, and we had run up against the end of our time. Her dress was going on a little bit late, as it tends to do on weddings, and I'm sitting there and I'm looking to play. It was very dark. It was very overcast, and I was trying to place her in the room. And I remember having that same feeling of saying, "This is inexcusable. This is beyond what you can tolerate within the realm of like, hey, this is a real day." And we as a team sort of agreed. Jay, I think this is sort of this is how I understood it to be, which is you said, when we're in bride prep, do the regular wedding thing. When we're at the church, do the regular wedding thing. When we're on the dance floor, do the regular wedding thing. And in exchange, we're going to be really heavy-handed for our portrait session and our family photo booth and our second portrait session. And so I sort of, in my mind, I sort of knew like, hey, I have permission here to sort of take what I've been given and do the best I can, but it's also not, this is not production. So I don't have to feel that feeling of like, oh, I broke the Huxley Film prototype. That was a really great feeling to have permission to say, hey, this isn't that moment. This is just bride prep. It's your old friend bride prep. Bride prep. Go do bride prep. And then she gets blasted with a blinking red light. It didn't even stay red. It kept turning blue because they were, like you said, they were projecting light onto the building. So they were literally blasting light into the window at her. And I remember just sitting there with the photographer who we had not yet built rapport with, and the coordinator who I just met, and the bride who I had just met. And I was like, I think this is too much of a problem. And that's what I think is really interesting about this particular wedding video is when we were talking about earlier how this was a pretty typical wedding. This is how typical we're talking. Like there was red and blue lights blasting through the window that we couldn't control. It was so typical that there's like variables that are just so. Weddings are so funny. There are variables that you could never conceive of come up on the day of, and you have to problem solve them. And so I was ready to make my regular, because I was told that this was regular old bride prep, and I said like, oh well, this is just the worst day of my life. There's nothing else to say about this. And then this is the big difference. Like we had only 20 minutes from the time that we were in the room till we had to leave. And in 20 minutes, I wouldn't even be able to make it down the stairs, out the elevator, outside to find someone to advocate for and make it back up and shoot in a tasteful way. And the fact that there was a producer, Jay, you were on set with us, you could actually leave the space, go do sort of like a charismatic, hey, man, if I ran down the stairs, like my anxiety would be like all over my face. I'd be like, you have to turn it off. And they would say, I will not, because I wouldn't be very like gracious, because I would be feeling that wedding stress. And so, God, the role of a producer on the day of was just instrumental in allowing us to be successful.
That's pretty wacky.
We really did
actually.
only need 3 shots. As you said, we only needed that push in. We needed a couple shots. You don't need 20 minutes of footage. If I can get 90 great seconds of footage because somebody made the light great for me in the other 15 minutes, that's a win, and it actually carries a lot of weight in the edit. You do not need 20 minutes of like picking up the scraps. You can actually get away with just 90 seconds at the end. It's great. And that's a huge difference between the way that we shot this film and every other wedding video that I've had.
Yeah, and so the similarities were limited time, totally normal schedule. And if you've never done like an inner city kind of wedding, there's a lot of wasted time traveling. There's limited access to beautiful outdoor locations. And luckily we have experience in that, which is why we did the lights. Cause I'm like, we're not going to have anything good from outside. We're not going to have any drone footage either. Cause it's inner city. You can't do it. So we had all these normal limitations, and then we had all these enhancements, right? So we knew we were going to deliver 4K and we were shooting 6K. So we knew we had post stabilization as a tool. We knew we had BRAW, which is a raw video codec that allows you to really change the camera settings in post. And so and we knew we had the limits of these lenses, but we also had the some of the forgiveness of these lenses, right? It allowed you to artfully be soft and do certain things. And so it really created a really unique product, which was like pretty much all our bride and groom prep was really that made the film was like within a 10-minute period of time of shooting. Pretty much all our portrait stuff was within a 5-minute period of time. And the rest was just a normal wedding, minus the fact that we lit the bride and groom during the ceremony. We did light them. And by the way, loved it. It's so subtle, but it's so much better.
I think the other thing that we didn't even really discuss is the fact that Jay, you and I actually had gone to the hotel probably like 2, 3, 4 weeks before the wedding. And
you weren't that into it, I remember.
Well, I'd been there before for a lot of bride and groom prep, and because we shoot the Boston Public Library, which is right across the street, so everyone usually gets ready at the hotel and then moves over to the Boston Public Library. But we hadn't shot a wedding there before, and so we were like, okay, what does the light look like? And I'm just looking at the light in all of these rooms, and it's all tungsten. We did location scouting the day before the wedding at the ceremony location at the church, and we're like, everything is orange. It's going to be dark outside. So it's just like, how can we? And actually, I had shot a wedding at the church earlier in the summer, a photography wedding. And I was like, it was hard for me in my raw images, even like, because it was just so orange. And
that's a very orange room.
Man, it's brutal. Like the walls are yellow, and then the pillars are orange, and then the light is orange. It's just like there's no. So we were like, that was another problem that ahead of time we were like, okay, this is something that maybe we should
two
just
lights,
try.
And we had someone go early and pre-produce that.
Yep. And I should mention too, I think you and I, not only were we trying to figure out like, okay, what are the problems? Okay, we're just going to throw some lights up. But we were like, stylistically, how can we make this look? And like, who are some people that do a really good job lighting these kind of environments? You and I always talk about Sharon and Fior
which we
films. We're like,
totally failed at doing anything close to Sharon. Like we wanted that.
But we were like,
if
we can incorporate some of the things that Sharon is doing, then I will be somewhat happy. And just like, I really want to use our pro photos and just try to hit certain points.
Not
to make
pro
them
photos,
look
Jared.
A little bit better.
Practolites.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Our Practolites. And so we were like, okay, because the ceremony wouldn't be nearly as good looking if we hadn't brought those too. Like, I didn't even remember that actually.
Yeah, it's so much better looking, but it's just like,
Yep.
it's nice in a way that you don't notice it, which in my opinion,
Subtle.
it's just like good technology, and anything elegant, it doesn't insist upon itself. It just is good. And I think that is what a lot of the things ended up happening when you look at how this came out. It all disappears. All the pre-production disappears, and it looks like it was supposed to be that way, and it looks like it was easy. To the point where it's like, I don't think anyone watching this film would think that we did all the things that we did to get what we got. And maybe that means that we suck and we did a bad job, but maybe it means we did a great job, and I think it's one of those things where all this pre-production, the other thing that we did, and then we're going to watch the film soon, guys. So definitely, stay tuned, because there's going to be another video where we're going to actually just go through the film. And so that's going to be really fun and exciting. And I'm looking forward to doing that. But I had a concept, because I like concepts. I'm a movie guy, right? And I think there has to be like a something that feels like produced, right? So I was like, what if we start the film with the cleanup? Because this is going to be a mess. And I remember I'll take credit for this, even though I don't even know, but I'll just go ahead and take credit, which was I really pushed John and Kristen. I wanted Kara, but John and Kristen, the wedding planner, I was like, please, they weren't going to do the confetti.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, please do the confetti. It's totally worth the extra money. And I just
when
kept
we met with them, John was like, yeah, we're thinking about doing confetti. And Jay and I were both like, yeah, you should do the confetti. He was like, well, it's $3,000 to do the confetti. And we were both like, oh, no, you shouldn't do the confetti. But the confetti would look really good on camera. And John's like, okay, yeah. All right. That's all I had to know.
and I told Kristen privately, I'm like, please get them to do it. It's gonna make the film. When they told me they're doing it, I was like, okay, this is my film. It's confetti. That's the film. Mm-hmm. Because I know I have this, and it's such a great storytelling amount. It's on the floor. It's everywhere. It's a huge mess. It's gonna be. There's so many parts about this confetti. Like, if you watch that film, we made mosaics of confetti. We did a confetti reverse. The film ends on confetti and starts on confetti. It's like this idea of making a mess. And then so we had a concept, and so we actually got after the wedding. I was like, we are going to all stay basically till 2 a.m. We're going to shoot this. And after the wedding, we got the cleanup crew, to come and do certain things for us. And so we did like real production. at this wedding. We were lighting all this stuff.
It's worth saying we lit the guys sweeping the floor. We backlit all the shoes on the ground. Like we were at the end of our energy, and we began a brand new production. Like the wedding was over, and we just took a little break. I remember we just all laid on our backs in their gear room. We just laid on the floor, and we just sort of like debriefed like what in the world just happened. And then once the people cleared out, we're like, all right, let's get started. And we went in the room and sort of like concepted out this idea that you had originally floated, which I carried with me for the months leading up to the wedding as well. This idea that, we're going to start a wedding with a custodial staff sweeping, like preposterous idea. And I was like addicted to the idea of it because I knew that it was so unusual. And it's just even when you first said it to us, it was so surprising that I was like, it has to happen now. And so the idea that we were walking around with sometimes with a tripod, sometimes with handheld, and trying to find the details that we had sort of, I think it's really interesting. This is another pre-production note that it would be really interesting for folks to know, which is that you had originally tasked us, Jay, with keeping an eye out throughout the day for events, particularly at the reception, that might correlate well to trash on the floor later.
Yes.
And like keep our eyes peeled for like, hey, if you see a person drop a glass, follow that glass down to the ground. We could use that later. If you see a person like drop some of their clothes or like lose their shoes, like catch that in the moment. We might use that later. And like, what an interesting thing to think about on the front end, not as an editing trick, but like keeping your eyes peeled for tasteful trash, and and then later at night doing that. Like, I can't imagine what the people working were thinking we were doing. We're just like pushing trash around. And my favorite image imaginable is that we like spun a wine glass on the table, and I had
it was like one of those, I don't know what they call them, the kazoos or whatever.
I had you keep walking past me because I wanted the wind of a body to move the confetti on the floor, and we're just doing this over and over again, like an hour after the wedding had ended. Like they probably were watching us, like, videographers, go home. Like, what are you guys doing?
We have to close the building.
But it was so interesting because like those opening shots are so impactful, and like in the idea that we're trying to like tell people visually in the first 5 seconds of video, hey, you're not about to watch the film that you're used to. You're about to see something that is different. I hope you like it. But we're not employing the traditional ways of shooting this thing. I can't think of a more on-the-nose way of saying this ain't your regular wedding film, quite like filming the custodian cleaning and filming the trash on the floor and knowing that that's going to be how the video opens.
It's like really critical. This is a really critical shot, this trash.
Right. It was as critical, and it was as pre-planned as who was shooting the first kiss. Like they lived together. They're just as critical.
Even like me throwing up the stupid H2 and recording the countdown, I was like, I knew I was going to reverse it in post. and that we were going to be doing that, like, countdown. Like this idea of like, what is New Year's Eve? It's a time. It's the end of something and the beginning of something else. What is a wedding? It's the end of something and the beginning of something else. It's like, I don't know. I just kept thinking, it's messy, it's beautiful, it's formative, it's just so many things. And I was like, this is a great metaphor. This party is a great metaphor. How do we tell about this? And it was like, it's artful, but it's very authentic. And it's not like so abstract that someone couldn't understand this. But I think it's abstract enough that it feels like, a person with a brain thought about it and they put some thought behind it. So anyway, let's close it up, Jared. Do you want anything you want to kind of say as we kind of move into watching the film?
Yeah, I think kind of moving forward as we're like, okay, we've shot a couple Huxley films. Like, what is our style? Like, what are the things that we try to get out of it? And just kind of talking about this and having this conversation. I think what you try to do, and some of the best moments that I think that I've ever captured on film, they tend to be kind of sporadic, but they're moments that wouldn't have happened unless you had like a really solid plan beforehand. Essentially, you're just setting yourself up to be lucky beforehand, and that always just comes with having a good plan. And so I think we went into this wedding having a good idea of like, these things we know are going to happen, these things may happen, and these are the things that we're kind of like thinking won't happen, but we have a good idea like of what we want if those kind of moments present themselves. And so, I think we had a really solid plan going into the wedding, and it was rewarding at the end of the day. And I think that's part of the whole creative process, right?
Yep.
Is like, whether you're working with talent or you're shooting a wedding where you're completely out of control, like there's going to be that kind of ness in a wedding that is uncontrollable and unforeseeable. But if you set yourself up with a good game plan, you present yourself with opportunities to just get lucky. And I think we got pretty lucky in a lot of cases too. So
you're about to.
Let's do.
Yeah. So if
Go
you're
ahead.
listening to this, I want you to, if you're on YouTube, go click on the little video below for the next video, or stay tuned or whatever. If you're listening on podcast, we encourage you to listen to the next one, but also go check it out on YouTube. I think it's going to be a lot better when you have the visuals. But we're so grateful for you checking it out. Hopefully this was kind of like a peel back behind the curtain, and I think maybe a lot of this stuff wasn't super obvious when you watch the film, but hopefully for you, if you're a filmmaker, image maker of any way, maybe you related to some of those challenges. Maybe they inspired you. Maybe there was a new way of thinking that will help you with your next film. Either way, we're super grateful to provide it. But this is definitely subscribe. Check us out on YouTube. We're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify. We're on all the platforms that you're used to. And it means a lot when you subscribe. You give us 5 stars. You hit the little alert bell. You do all those social media stuff that everyone's telling you to do. We want you to do them as well. But we also want you to check out the film breakdown that we're going to do on our next episode. So stay tuned.